It's The Beautiful Truth with Fintan Dunne reporting on the 3rd of January 2022. I love the sound of that year. It's going to be an epic year, folks, and I'll explain why in some detail. Stand by. But it's also going to be a year for celebration, and the celebrations are underway already. This guy here celebrating to the moon. This is, of course, the leader of the resistance to global government policy on COVID. This is Dr. Emmanuel Goldstein himself. Yes, down at the CDC, they have the employees trotting in and tossing cabbages and rotten fruit at this guy's picture on the wall. The daily hate Dr. Bob at the CDC. But he's celebrating because, of course, even though he lost 500,000 followers on Twitter, he nevertheless gained about 50 million views on Rogan, it's reckoned. And that's probably not far off. That has been and was a huge breakthrough for us, folks. And if you didn't catch that, you need to. It's 3 hours long. It's riveting. It's riveting when you realize that normies all around the world and all across the United States are listening to this. The leader, unquestionably, of the global resistance, nailing it with Joe Rogan, an intelligent Joe Rogan asking intelligent questions. If you missed it, you will find it, the full version and clips, on breakfornews.com. Visit the forum there. This is the redesigned forum into the coronavirus don't believe the hype thread, which started off a long time ago. And there you'll find a link to the interview and the clips. Killer interview, as I said in the post there. And full interview is there along with some of the clips. And those clips, I think, are going to go viral because this thing, if you pardon the pun, was such a breakthrough moment for us folks to break through into normie land. A signal moment. And not the only breakthrough. In fact, just the icing on the cake. Because the real breakthrough, which we are now about to benefit from, is the arrival of the latest mutant ninja, Miley Cyrus. Yes, the version with the O, and it's the last one, and here's why. Here's some information out of Israel indicating that data indicates we've got perhaps 60% of people asymptomatic. That's an incredibly high number. You know what else is incredibly high? The reproduction rate or infectivity of this version. It's about 9. In other words, you're likely to infect, all things being equal, around about 9 other people with Omicron if you get it. And that compares to, say, 5 other people for Delta and 3 other people for the original Wuhan strain. So this thing is mega infectious. It's unstoppable, in fact, and it will bring an end to all of the policies that we've seen. You're seeing the policies change already, but they have to change and they have to end because it's all different now. This is a mild version. This has a hospitalization rate, which is a fraction of previous versions, and it also confers some nice immunities. Let's dig in to some more about this particular version. As you see here, this is the antibody response to Omicron. There is a 14.4-fold increase in antibodies to the Omicron version. But at the same time, we also see a 4.4-fold increase in antibodies to Delta is triggered by an Omicron infection. So there is a benefit here that an increased resistance to a Delta infection goes along with the Omicron, and the cost isn't too high when you consider that this is a relatively mild version. I mean, in many ways, this is what we've been waiting for. Nature, or something, we'll get to that, evolving to the point where it was able to confer neutralizing against previous variants, perhaps, including Delta, and this is the research on that. So this could indicate as well that the end of testing, because in the UK, it looks like pre-departure COVID tests are about to be scrapped because Omicron is less severe for the fully vaccinated, and ministers say there's nothing in Omicron which would suggest further COVID restrictions will be needed. So we're already seeing a scaling back, folks. And further interesting news, over 95% of Omicron cases are in vaccinated people. This is where it starts to get really interesting now. And let's just dig a little further into this. Some links from Robert Malone, which he circulated, and he's got a Substack. Just look for R.W. Malone MD on Substack. Omicron significantly escapes the two-dose vaccine regime, he quotes from research, ranging from complete loss to 33 to 44-fold reduction in neutralizing activities. My God. So Omicron completely gets around the vaccines. And one of the questions would be why? That's amazing. How did this thing evolve so effectively? And this is a significant question because the evolution of this thing seems to be highly unusual. You would expect, for example, that there would be halfway Omicrons also circulating, wouldn't you? You'd expect that there would be versions of Omicron when it was like halfway there to the current level of mutations, and that they'd be also found, and they're not. In fact, Omicron's genome it's old. It's from back 2020. Where has it been? Some speculation, wild, I think, has been that it's been in AIDS patients, sort of mutating away inside of an AIDS patient. This is highly, highly unlikely based on analysis which the gene boys and girls have been doing. So there's something weird going on here. Let's dig a little further. It's going to be very revealing. So let me take you to a very interesting article which you will find on unglossed.substack.com called Mouse Party by Brian Murray, just before Christmas, December 21, in which he speaks of a new niche in nature. And he draws to our attention a recent research paper by Cameroni et al. Broadly neutralizing antibodies overcome SARS-CoV-2 Omicron antigenic shift. Oh my God, what does that mean? It means that there is something going around which fits both mouse and human ACE2. That this Omicron version is as good a fit for mouse as it is for human. You remember all the talk about, whether this thing was in bats, camels or elephants or who knows, the original Wuhan version. What talk has there been of where this Omicron might have been? None. Why? Maybe because one of the places it might have been is in mice. A very interesting article which we will now read a little bit more of, eh? The arrival of a variant which possesses adequate affinity for both mouse and human ACE2 receptor implies that Omicron may be occupying an entirely different and likely much richer niche than that occupied by SARS-CoV-2 thus far. It can be spread to humans by mice and vice versa. Now that could account for where it's been. If it looks very like stuff that was around in 2002, or 2001, I should say, or 2020, if it looks like old stuff, maybe it's because it exited human populations into mouse populations at that time, and the reason it's accumulated all these mutations is because it's been spreading, without our knowledge, in a mouse population, and it has achieved higher function, higher infectivity, and then it's used that infectivity to hop out and back into humans again. That's the theory. That's what we're going to examine in more detail. So the higher affinity for tissue in the upper respiratory tract, however, suggested other experiments may also contribute to defining the niche. Now, this is interesting. It's good news, too, that this variant is an upper respiratory tract infection rather than a lower respiratory tract infection, which would be much more serious, of course. Going on. It's also possible, he writes, that the niche is volatile and that extinction may be Omicron's eventual fate. Now, he writes then, the inference that Omicron is a mouse-optimized variant is strongly reinforced by the paper by Y.C. et al. Appearing on the same day, Evidence for a Mouse Origin of the SARS-CoV-2 Omicron Variant. And I've got the papers involved here. There's the evidence for a mouse origin of SARS-CoV-2 Omicron variant, and there is broadly neutralizing antibodies overcome SARS-CoV-2 Omicron antigenic shift. They're the two key articles that sustain this hypothesis which he is putting forward here and which seems to me to be quite well founded. Strong evidence, indeed, that Omicron has spent its pre-outbreak mutational journey off the human reservation in mice. It turns out, he writes, that some humans have been trying to create a mouse-optimized version of SARS-CoV-2 for over a year. And even worse, some humans already understood that such a version would be effective at infecting both mice and humans. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, you might legitimately research purposes, and research that's perhaps very dangerous isn't legitimate, but we'll say legitimate research purposes might be that you want to take a look at what would happen if this thing, we could transfer it into mice and test it in mice and then test therapies in mice, and that way we could come up with human applicable solutions by testing in mice. So there might be reasons, and in fact we do have mice that have been specially genetically altered to have more ACE2 receptors that are more human-like, and therefore are a better test subject for testing out various therapies and also infectivity, etc. But those genetically altered mice, the problem is that we're having to tweak with them, so therefore we don't know if really we're messing around too much when we genetically alter. It'd be better if we were able to just infect mice straight without genetically altering them with the CoV-2, and then you would have a better testing environment. That's just an idea of some of the thinking that goes into these research areas. So let's come back now to his very interesting analysis. So he says, May 2020, discovery of the niche, and he goes on. My current intuition is that Omicron is a descendant of a lab-created mouse-optimized mutant SARS-CoV-2 in early 2020. The papers listed by Y et al. Indicate at least 9 such mutant viruses were created in a lab, and some more recently, but using 2020-era live virus samples as the template. MA, a recombinant mutant virus created in early 2020 at the University of North Carolina under the auspices of Ralph Baric, is a progenitor, it seems, of this current variant. Let's dig into this a little bit more. MA was SARS-CoV-2 with an artificially modified spike reverse engineered from the mouse ACE2 receptor. That's what MA was, a creation, right? And it went quite well. MA could naturally infect mice without the requirement that the mice were genetically altered to overexpress the ACE2. MA could infect mice straight up, ordinary mice, any mouse. Eventually, it was refined into MA10, and the results were posted online in September. Ostensibly, this was to foster, as I've explained, a more lifelike infection in mice. Right. And these MA and MA10 were deemed to require biosafety level 3 precautions only and potentially made available for other researchers. This despite the fact that the paper announcing the creation of MA admits the discovery of cross-infection potential in humans. So, hold on a second. Maybe you need to be a bit more careful with stuff like this that can infect mice and humans in case some unexpected things happen. Indeed, maybe so. And he goes on in conclusion, when the full results for MA were published circa August 2020, the mouse-human niche became open source knowledge. Anyone who wanted to could have cooked up an Omicron. Anyway, Brian Mowry's conclusion is that it's possible one of these mouse variants escaped into the environment, and it's been in mice and it's now come back into humans. But I have another alternative hypothesis, which is similar. It's been in mice all right, but not in the environment. Let's just conclude the article by Brian here. He says, if MA is not just the theoretical, but in fact the physical ancestor for Omicron, then this could account for the variant's notorious genetic resemblance to circa 2020 SARS-CoV-2 strains, including the 493K mutation issue, which he says is not a game changer. That's something that some of the sub-mutations could have worked their way around. And he says then, in conclusion, all of these potential events could potentially apply to other published mouse-optimized mutants, published in peer-reviewed literature, and a list of which he compiles in footnotes, or to additional unpublished experiments. Multiple people may have solved the mouse-human niche puzzle independently. No one, he says, appears to have been trying to stop any of them. And the reason you might stop them is because of the danger that this would present. But there is, of course, another hypothesis, now that we see that this mouse thing is a possibility. And that is that we've all known since this thing came that it would eventually mutate into something that was milder and more infectious. Just a question of time, really, and hopefully it wouldn't be too severe in the interim. We all knew that. So what if, when we had the ability to perform experimentation in mice, what if a cohort of what we will call, for lack of a better word, white hats, or individuals with quasi-state level access and access to significant resources and access to strategic response at a military level, decided that they wouldn't wait around for nature because that might take too long, that they would begin to see if they could indeed cook up such a version. And that would be more easy than you think, because you can perform the necessary experiments, you can cycle it, you can model it, you can, in other words, you can computer model it before you begin, you can start to play around with it and combine both modeling and experimentation, and it may take you some time, but eventually you'll get to a point, I believe, where you will have a version of it that now has both, that is optimized at just the way you want in terms of infectivity with mice. The severity has been reduced and it's more of an upper respiratory tract infection. You know you're on a winner here. And now with its ability to infect humans built in, you're ready to transfer that back to humans. You're ready to whatever. It could be released. Africa would be a great place to deliberately release something like that, because of the surveillance is poorer and therefore the ability to backtrack. The backtrack of Omicron would be hindered. But to me, Omicron would seem perhaps to have just as likely that kind of an origin as a natural origin in mice. But either way, certainly Omicron has a background which is not being discussed. I wonder why. Let's check more. It's an interesting story, and it's going to sort of take us on a little boomerang out, which will come back to where we started. And it's from Bad Catitude on Substack. There's something antigenic in Denmark. Boosters show negative vaccine efficacy for cases. Negative vaccine efficacy. Vaccines, including boosters, are showing strong negative efficacy versus Omicron. Now, that would also support the idea of these being cooked, because if you want to get your version out there, it's got to be a version that's capable of getting around the existing vaccines. If it can't get around existing vaccines, it can't infect, and it can't provoke the response, and it can't then therefore generate the required immunity. So it's not only got to have the right profile in terms of disease when you have it in your mouse model, but you also have to make sure that it can make that leap, that it can get around the vaccines. How you do that in the lab is that you're cooking this thing, and you're cooking it in sera, of vaccinated individuals and infected individuals, so as that the virus has to climb that mountain because it's fighting antibodies, and therefore an ongoing battle is going on in a laboratory setting and not in a natural setting. So interesting anyway, that antigenic issue indicates the potential danger, and a cartoon, I suppose, really does communicate the core issue here. Want to see a trick? Says the man with the vax. Sure, says Joe Public. The man with the vax does the little flip of the skateboard. What a trick. Want to see another? Yes. Then I can't help you, says the one-trick pony. Because the vax is a one-trick pony. And that's the danger. Original antigenic sin. I didn't realize that immunology had something that was almost religious. So if this is what it looks like to me, says Bad Catitude, this is not spreading like wildfire in these groups because Omicron is some crazy new super spread variant. It's spreading because all these people overtrained their immune systems against a specific spike protein pattern, and their immune response is now a one-trick pony that cannot mount an effective sterilizing resistance against variants, and perhaps will never gain this capability. Sobering conclusion. Dr. Bob Nobody actually explained this to Joe Rogan when he was on the show so well, so elegantly. I'll paraphrase his explanation like this. Suppose a little Cairn Terrier comes at you, barking and nipping at your heels, quite literally, until you're hopping, trying to get away from it. It'll leave a memory, indeed. And the next time a Cairn Terrier comes at you, barking, what are you going to do? You're going to run. You're going to run, because your response has already been conditioned by your prior exposure to Cairn Terriers. You know these suckers. They're dangerous. So prior experience conditions response, even later responses, and this applies apparently to our own immune systems. So you experience, writes Bad Catitude, a flu one year and then another the next. If they're sufficiently similar, you may just use the same antibodies you used last year or 20 years ago. They're unlikely to work as well because they're not specific to this new virus. If they diverge significantly, you could be in real trouble. You'll be spamming with a response that has no effect and foregoing those that do, and the virus can run rampant. So your prior experience can lead your immune system to respond with memory B cells instead of deploying some naive B cells to just go out there and track down whatever new is here. Instead, the old troops with the old ID of the old enemy as an ID to search for go out, and of course they don't find the old enemy. It's not the old enemy, it's a variation. So that has an implication for the vaccines as well. Original Antigenic Sin, writes Eugippius, and the links to all this research, if you want to read these articles yourself in full, is in the video link. You'll get an omnibus link there, which will take you to every single article. So in September, a small study conducted by researchers at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam looked at antibody responses of severely ill coronavirus patients and found that the response of severely ill, unlike that of mild patients, was dominated by antibodies against ordinary seasonal coronavirus. In other words, the most severely ill patients had antibodies against common coronavirus that these patients had recovered from in the past. And another study from St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, confirms these findings. So the problem there being, and there's a second article to follow up on this. So the problem there would be that when you vaccinate, you are basically arming the wrong army. And they're going to deploy, and your immune system's going to tend to deploy the wrong army because this thing is mutated on from the original. It don't look like that anymore. And therefore, the most dangerous thing, he concludes, will be at this point to vaccinate children. The virus is not a threat. If they're infected by the new form that are sure to emerge every winter, through them and the as yet unvaccinated, then layered immunity is coming, And as long as the vaccinators are permitted to continue their radical and increasingly insane campaign, nothing will improve. Well, there you go. That's an opinion, isn't it? Others say that vaccines are protective and absolutely what we need, including the medical authorities worldwide. So it's up to you to try and make up your own mind about what's really going on here. Something else I'll just briefly draw to your attention in conclusion on these topics is the question of CCP and whether they concealed CoV-2 in China back as far as March 2018. That's from The Ethical Skeptic. And again, I've got a link to that in the video description. Though original antigenic sin is an issue, obviously, in immunology, but I don't think something that needs to be of great concern because of the relatively mild Omicron, which is going to predominate now, perhaps slower than originally anticipated, but will predominate it. Eventually, everyone's going to get it. And it ain't too bad. And we have, if you like, by that undone a lot of the damage done in the last 2 years. I would say the chances of Omicron emerging naturally are very low. The chances of it being a laboratory escape from research designed to try and find therapeutics or some other noble purpose or even money. But indeed, I believe it's also, if not indeed most likely, that it is the result of a determined and deliberate effort to produce such a variant as a means of bringing this nightmare to an end. It would be something that, militarily speaking, would be a smart move, I think. And also it's something that obviously nobody will be talking about right now. It does mean, however, that would explain why there's a certain hysteria in Europe over mandatory vaccines, etc., because the arrival of Omicron signals the end of COVID. Because a hugely transmissible, widespread virus will burn its way through in a matter of months. And it's going to be over. So if anybody wants to try and move on passports, mandates, mandatory vaccines, anything else, they better do it in the next few months. Because after that, the window of opportunity will have closed forever. Good news, I think. And the window of opportunity is closing nevertheless in November of 2022 in the United States. Epically, it will close with a huge, overwhelming victory for Republicans in the 2022 fall elections. That will change the political landscape in the United States and around the world. But already, I believe, we're seeing the effects of these people having passed the peak of control and now being on the decline. Beautiful to see it happen. And I think that many people in Europe especially are unaware of the implications of what's about to happen in the United States. If you're going to have a totalitarian attempt to take over the entire planet, it's a bit of an epic fail if you fail to take the United States. The most important, I would put it, power institution on the entire planet. It's a bummer for your plan if you fail to take the USA. It's an even bigger bummer if your enemies, whom you have attacked, are resurgent, have the support of perhaps up to 2/3 of the population, 60%, 65% of the population. And if your political representatives have been turfed out and a wave of Trump-loving Congress people and senators are elected in their stead. That's not a win. That's a big lose. And I think people in Europe are not aware enough because of the suppression of the reality of what's about to happen in the USA. They're not aware enough of that reality. You need to take heart in that reality. That's key. And the battle at the moment is for Europe. I'm looking forward to that because I think that's a battle we're about to win also. So I'm looking forward to a good 2022, really, and to also extending out the scope of what we've been doing here. You know, I was in computers 20 years before they became mainstream. I was famously reporting on 9/11 and launching an investigation into those events 20 years before pretty much everybody became a conspiracy theorist. So it is time to take on some new frontiers. There are frontiers I've been exploring before, and we'll get into that this year on breakfornews.com. By the way, the forum has been redesigned, and there are some nice new features in there. Let me just go back to general discussion. Here we are. And one of the nicest features I like is the ability to upload content. Let me just take an example. Here's a story. Pictorially, we can communicate. I like that. The road to lockdown, how unions drove COVID policy. I hadn't really been aware of that. And maybe it's something we'd like to share with others. So what I'm going to first do is reduce the size of it using Control- on my keyboard. And then I'm going to snip it using a screen grabber. So here's my snipping tool. And I'm going to create a new snip. And let's just create an image which has the headline and a bit of the text in it. That will do lovely. And now we can just save that. And I will also just copy the URL. Copy. Right, let's pop into the Break for News general discussion. So I'll go to coronavirus and click on this little thing over here, which brings me to the latest post in that. Here we go. That's the Joe Rogan stuff, yeah, and we'll post a reply to that. And now what I'm going to do is just go down here to attachments, add files, and I'm simply going to add in that image from my phone or PC, whichever. So file added, there's union.jpg. There it appears, and I can place that inline. So there, attachment, union.jpg, attachment. Press enter a couple of times. Paste that link. Daily Skeptic. Let's have a look at how that's going to look. It's going to look okay. There's the link. Let's just submit and we post. And now there's our story. Nice picture. Some basics of the text there, and then a link to the actual story itself. Hey, isn't that cool? And if you have any stories that you'd like to get people up to speed on, then post on Break for News forum. We certainly appreciate that. And of course, we also have the homepage of breakfornews.com where you'll find stories galore. And we'll be opening up that to members posting stories also during 2022. Okay, so, you know, I'm fairly happy about the way 2022 is working out. I hope you have a great 2022. And I'm looking forward to extending the range of the stuff that we're covering here, as I say, moving up another level. Anyway, that's it for this edition. I'll be back with more very soon as the year progresses, and I hope you'll join me for that. But in the meantime, for breakfornews.com, this has been Fintan Dunne reporting. See you soon.
Calling all mice. It's a mouse party. Calling all mice. Come on and get it started. Calling all mice. Hurry up and don't be tardy. Calling all you mice. It's a mouse party, party, party. Everybody on the dance floor. I want to hear you squeak. You got to shimmy your whiskers and move your feet. Yeah, all you little mice now. Come out of your holes. We got a big sound system and a laser show. Oh, yeah! Calling all mice. It's a mouse party. Calling all mice.